Hi BookTube, my name is Juan, I am just one reader, and today I want to talk about the short story collection Lovely Dark Deep by Joyce Carol Oates. This is my introduction to Joyce Carol Oates' writing. I had never encountered this author before, and she's a big author. She's like one of the American authors still working today, and I had never read her. I read this and I really liked it. I would even say that I loved it. And I would thoroughly recommend it to you, and that's why I wanted to make this review. Hopefully it will be a short review. So what I want to do in this review is talk a little bit about the themes, the writing, how this writing struck me, how I would describe it, and talk a little bit about the stories. I will not be able to go into a lot of detail because this is just a short review, but just tell you a little bit about why I really enjoyed most of these stories, and the collection overall was really great. And also talk a little bit about the pros, then the cons, and then give you my overall rating, as well as some other recommendations of some other short story collections that I recommend. So firstly, I would like to talk about the themes. The themes that Joyce Carol Oates addresses in her writing in this particular collection are very much about different aspects of the human psyche and human emotion. It deals a lot with relationships. In every single story in this collection, we get a character or a set of characters with very interesting relationships with some other characters. And the focus of the story is very much on the relationship. So it's very much about characters. There is also a lot of plot, and the stories are very interesting in terms of plot and story and setting, but I would say that overall this is an incredibly character-based short story collection. It deals with guilt, with shame, with family dynamics, and the hidden side of relationships that we don't often see. It deals a lot with the internal world of the individual, but also the group. So it is a very profound approach to subjectivity, I would say. Now I would like to talk about the pros, what I really loved about this collection. Firstly, I have to say that this collection and the way that Joyce Carol Oates talks about or writes about her characters, I found it to be incredibly psychoanalytical. And what I mean is that the way that she puts the reader into the mind, into the psyche of these characters, is very similar to the psychoanalytical experience. I am a psychotherapist and psychoanalyst, and I was struck by how wonderful and how accurate Joyce Carol Oates' depiction and portrayal of the inner world of these characters is, because it really feels like when you are a therapist and you are listening to the inner workings of someone else's psyche, what we call the productions of the unconscious. You can certainly find that psychoanalytical experience, or an experience that is very close to the psychoanalytical experience, through Joyce Carol Oates' writing. Something else that I really liked in this collection was the writing itself. Joyce Carol Oates has a writing style that is very clean, very accessible, very friendly. She's not pompous or elaborate or flowery. She's quite precise, and she gets to the point. It's very much about what is going on in terms of dialogue and plot and character. So there's no sense of, flamboyant exuberance in her writing. I really liked her writing because it feels very readable and very compelling, but at the same time there's enough craft in there that you can really dig deeper. So it's like you can read these stories on many different levels. You can just enjoy them on the surface for what they are, but you can also dig deeper and get very close to what I was talking about, the psychoanalytical experience, like really get to see the productions of the psyche and the unconscious of these people. I also really liked that there was enough variety in this short story collection. Some of the stories felt a little similar to one another, but for the most part, I would say that there's enough diversity. One of the stories has a little bit of magical realism or a fantasy element. It is allured or assumed or suggested that one of the characters starts transforming into an animal. And it's not really a fantasy story or anything like that, but I just really liked the little hint of suspension of disbelief. And yeah, I overall would say that this was a pretty diverse short story collection for the most part. Finally, something else that I really loved about this experience of reading this collection was that all of the stories are sort of treading that very fine line between the really mundane realism of everyday situations or everyday or relatable situations and falling into catastrophe. So there's a sense of dread, there's a sense of surprise. These stories are very compelling. There's a sense of danger, a sense of peril, a sense of dread that is permeating every single story in this collection, and it makes up for a very compelling read. Now, very quickly, I want to tell you about my favorite stories in this collection, just so that you can get a glimpse, a little taste of what you will encounter in this collection. So some of the stories that I really loved are Sex with Camel, which is about this young man. He's a teenager who is going with her grandmother to the hospital, and we just get to see that experience, and it is fascinating and ridiculously intriguing and ridiculously suspenseful. It's wonderful. Another story that I really liked is Mastiff, which is a very popular, very critically acclaimed story, which is about this couple, this man and woman, who are sort of linked by an attack. They are attacked by a dog. That's why the story is called Mastiff. It's a wonderful story. I mean, describing these stories really doesn't make them justice. Then there's the story Betrayal, which is about this young man who is betraying the family values, and he starts transforming into an animal, into a monkey. Then there's the story A Book of Martyrs, which inspired Joyce Carol Oates' longer novel, A Book of American Martyrs. This story is about abortion, and it's so tense and so packed with so many different things. It's a really wonderful story. Then there's another story, Things Passed on the Way to Oblivion, which is probably the most horrifying thing that I have read in recent months. It's about a girl who is dying, and she is it's never really clear why she's dying, but she's having a sort of seizure or fit of something. It's like an overdose, or it's never clear if it was an intoxication of something, but she's dying, and we get to see her backstory with her family. It's so tense and so horrifying. And finally, the story that gives the collection its title, Lovely Dark Deep, is about a young woman, journalist, poet kind of character, who goes to interview a famous poet, Robert Frost. And he's supposed to be like this, I think he's a real, I really know nothing about poetry, but Robert Frost, I think, is a real, yeah, of course, Robert Frost. Yeah, I remember reading something by him when I was in school. But anyway, so she goes to interview this Robert Frost guy, and it's a very tense situation, because there's like things that they start discussing, and there's a lot about another theme in this collection, now that I think about it, is manhood and men's very fragile egos. That's very present in here. So if you enjoy that kind of feminist or gender approach to reading, this has a lot of gender and identity issues to provide in terms of, food for thought. Now on to the things that I didn't enjoy as much. So this is the negative part. My only negative thing would be that I felt the collection started off really great with a lot of diversity, and the stories in the beginning of the collection were really wonderful, and the pacing was really wonderful. It had a really great rhythm, but then it started to get a little repetitive, so that by the last story in the collection, which is pretty much a novella, it's 100 pages long, I didn't really enjoy that one. I actually thought that even though it was the longest one, it was the weakest one. And it was sort of a rehash of many other things that she had explored in previous stories, and better, in my opinion. That's just how I felt. Overall, I really, really loved Joyce Carol Oates' collection, Lovely Dark Deep. I thoroughly recommend it, especially if you haven't read anything by her. I think this would be a great introduction. I really now feel very enthusiastic about reading more by Joyce Carol Oates. Now I want to try her novels. So I gave this short story collection, Lovely Dark Deep, 4 out of 5 stars. And finally, some recommendations. If you have enjoyed Lovely Dark Deep, or if you have enjoyed Joyce Carol Oates' writing before, or you just enjoyed what I said about it, I would recommend these 2 short story collections that I think are a little bit similar to Lovely Dark Deep in terms of the themes and the way that it really focuses on character and gender and relationships and all of these things and conflicts, but they are quite different to Joyce Carol Oates' writing as well. So I think these are interesting. This one is A Guide to Being Born by Ramona Osibel. It has a lovely cover. This is more of a magical realism short story collection, but it's really, really wonderful. And the other one is my favorite short story collection ever thus far, 10th of December by George Saunders. I am always recommending this book. It is truly wonderful. Thank you for joining me. That was my review for Lovely Dark Deep. I hope you enjoyed it, and please leave your comments down below.